Wonderful.
Patty.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi.
So typing the last session. It was so exciting to hear about the Hazelwood project because I wrote about that in my first book. It was one of the case studies that I wrote about. It was then called the Almano Project. But to now see that coming to reality is just so exciting. It's like, and to hear Lynn Force work on it, it was really neat.
Yeah. I love the work they're doing.
Oh, great. Hello, Lou.
Hello. Long time no see.
Yes. I'm glad you're here.
Me too.
Everyone, we'll give it maybe 2 more minutes for people to trickle in and start at the top of the hour.
Kathy, I feel like you're stalking me.
No, you just happen to be doing the sessions that I'm going to be writing about. I mean, and part of this, just so that people have the background when I follow up with them, is I did a story for Energy News Network in the fall that, was the result of several months of work, and basically was looking at, did the natural gas industry produce all these jobs that people had been talking about? And the answer is, you see little blips here and there, but it didn't seem to have terribly lasting difference in terms of making them do better than the state average. And so, one of the things a couple of people had said was, well, we lost some manufacturing jobs are good. And this is an area I know Reimagine Appalachia has been looking at. So a story that I'm looking to work on is going to be focusing on, what other alternatives are there beyond fossil fuels in terms of manufacturing that could help get jobs. So that's just the background and why I'm listening. And no, I'm not really stalking you, Amanda.
For those that don't know, Kathy, she's my favorite reporter. Energy News Network.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah, you do great stories. It's true.
So we're at the top of the hour. Thanks everyone for joining this breakout group on redeveloping shuttered coal plants. My name is Sam Mardell. I'm a manager with the carbon-free electricity practice at RMI, and I'll be leading us through the conversation over the next 45 minutes or so, along with Amanda Woodrum from Redeveloping Appalachia, who's been leading up a lot of the work that we'll be talking about. And so our goal for today is really in 2 parts. We want to provide some background on some work that Amanda in particular has been leading, but with a group of people over the past half year or so, thinking about opportunities to redevelop shuttered coal plants and make use of these sites for new purposes that can help serve communities. And second, I think the session is an invitation for the group to really provide input and ideas to help guide this work forward over the coming months and beyond, but also an invitation to kind of hear from people how they're thinking about redeveloping retiring fossil assets. I think this is an issue that is kind of growing in prominence, seeing a lot more news stories about it. It's coming up in some of the federal programs that have passed in recent legislation. And so people here might have stories or examples or ideas that would be useful to share or test with this group and make people aware of how you're thinking about the risks and opportunities of shuttered fossil fuel infrastructure and how we can make use of it in productive ways. So that's what we're hoping to do, and we'll split kind of the agenda in two parts. The first will be a bit of a download, I suppose, about the work that Amanda and I and others have been doing, and then we'll open up for a group conversation. And it's a pretty big group, and so that will involve both opportunities to share verbally, but we'd also love to hear people's ideas in chat. Understanding that with limited time, we might not be able to have a full conversation with such a large group. So maybe as a check-in question, feel free to post this in chat. I'm curious to hear, when you drive by a power plant, what is the first thing you think about? So we'll give a minute or two to ponder this question. And when you have a response, feel free to post it in the Zoom chat. Again, it's when you drive by a power plant, what is the first thing that you think about? Seeing pollution. Asthma and lung health, some of the health issues associated with pollution. And greenhouse gases. The energy grid and infrastructure. Climate disaster and greenhouse gas emissions. There are alternatives. And I asked this question in part because it premised some of the work that we've been doing over the past half year, thinking about power plants and both their role in providing electricity and grid services, as well as being sometimes pretty important for local economies, providing a lot of well-paying jobs, tax bases for the places that host them, as well as the pollution and greenhouse gas emissions associated with them. And we're seeing coal plants in particular, but other fossil fuel infrastructure too, begin to close in Appalachia and really all around the country. And as these sites close, we've begun thinking about them as both risks to communities. They can be these large sort of sites that provided services that no longer do, jobs and tax base, also sites of environmental pollution, but also as opportunities for redevelopment. There are a lot of physical infrastructure located at these sites that can be, in principle, pretty useful for new purposes. So there's transmission access, ways to access the electricity grid at these sites. And that's sort of unique that such large transmission access becomes available. It's a big challenge with building new energy generation is actually connecting to the grid. There's land and building structures that can be made use of. There's access to these sites via rail or water or road. And so these things can actually form an opportunity for thinking about how to use them to form new economic development or ways to site new activities that provide a lot of value to the places that host them. And so that's kind of the premise for some of the thinking that we've been doing over the past year. In May of 2022, Amanda championed a team at RMI's eLab Accelerator event, which is an event that RMI runs annually, where we have teams formed around a question. And so the question that Amanda brought was thinking about how to support redevelopment of coal plants to new productive purposes, and in particular, thinking about the opportunity for climate-friendly industrial parks. So mapping out what's preventing this from happening more often, and what resources or information or connections are needed by the people who would be interested in pushing for these opportunities and thinking about how to make use of these sites. And so we had a small group at Accelerator. We usually bring together 6 to 10 people who represent various experiences or areas of expertise. And so we had people from nonprofits, we had people from government, we had people from utilities, people who are really involved in the engineering questions about how to make use of industrial facilities, people who think more about the financial or legal aspects of this transition, to come together and kind of map out what do you need to do in order to turn a coal plant into something else. And simultaneously, what sort of resources would be really helpful for community stakeholders in particular for thinking about how to push this transition forward, and organize the different stakeholders who need to be involved in coming up with a vision that can actually sort of take place in the transition that can take place. After that event in May, the group has continued meeting and organized really around a project that I'm going to turn over to Amanda to explain more in full, but thinking about building out an online handbook, a collection of resources that are really important for in a centralized place that can be accessed easily, that are important sources of technical and other information, as well as building out kind of a community of practice that includes a lot of experts and other interested parties who can also form conversations around what needs to happen, what sort of information is necessary in order to make this transition, but also be called upon to support things like grant writing or technical input that community might need in order to help form a project that transitions a coal asset. So Amanda, I want to turn to you to give a little bit more information about the Reimagining Shuttered and Shuttered Coal Plants project and where we are.
Yeah, so I'm excited that we're going to start meeting monthly, and we are looking for folks that want to participate in this working group. We'll have a series. We're looking to identify best practices to overcome some of the barriers, I think, throughout this region. It's probably a lot of folks know on this call. We not only do we have shuttered and shuttering coal plants, but we still have former steel facilities that have been sitting around for a half a century. And I think that's where we'll end up if we aren't proactive. And in fact, we still have work to do, frankly, to redevelop the steel facility. So I'm also very interested in that idea, and I think there's some similarities. The handbook itself, it's the modern version of a handbook to redevelop shuttered coal plants, which of course really means an online web page. Will dig in, but identify the existing barriers. Of course, one of the big ones is brownfield remediation. And what are some of the best practices to get into that? We'll talk about best practices associated, and we'll dig into first best practices associated with things like dealing with the reluctant property owner, which we also have a lot of. There's possibly some carrots and sticks to use there. What do we do with the site? Sam kind of alluded to the different assets that are on the site, but these are really heavily reinforced electrical grid sites, so that there's really cool potential opportunities. If you get in there early enough, you can actually repurpose some of the energy related equipment. Of course, the longer it sits, like these former steel sites, the more deteriorating the existing buildings or equipment get. So the earlier you get in, the more you can think about repurposing some of that. So in the case of a shuttered coal plant, some of those things like boilers on site can be repurposed for things like combined heat and power, which is a much more way to heat and power manufacturing. We'll also be thinking about things like electrifying the ports, access to the sites with electric vehicles, or modernizing the infrastructure. And a lot of these sites already have great transportation network. They're located on waterways. We can talk about shipping in a much more efficient way. Upgrading the railways. Some of these most of these older sites were built around rail and water. And so here we're talking about a more energy efficient way, climate friendly way to transport things. So these are the, some of the things we're going to be thinking about when we compile the handbook, like what are the barriers, what are the best practices, and then of course some of what Sam was also alluding to when we talked about in the Make It in Appalachia breakout session before. What are even the opportunities? What can we be using these sites for? And I'm particularly interested in manufacturing, turning them into climate friendly industrial parks. Well, but you need to know like what's a realistic opportunity for the region, how do we figure that out? It's so there's some visioning work that needs to be done and who needs to be at the table. So those are the things we're thinking about for the handbook. We'll be digging into, looking for people to help with. I saw Bima here earlier. Are you still here? I don't know if you want to add your 2 cents. He's been a very active partner. Yep, there you are.
Yep, I'm here listening to it, Amanda, and thanks to you and Sam for organizing that. Having some difficulty with my camera, but yeah, this has been a really good thing. We were hoping to extend this further at Department of Energy. We're looking ways in which our energy asset transformation group can actually help and fund some activities around this. So we'll be in touch.
No,
Yes, please. I think this is a great time for questions. So Patricia, please.
I have a comment. I think one of the issues that concerns me in the space of reshaping our electric system is that we are moving away from the central station power plant model to a more distributed energy model where locations are both producing and using energy. And there's a need for coordination among different locations of power generation and use, like net zero buildings that produce more than they use, for example. I'm thinking that one of the barriers to this kind of shift in the system to a more renewable and sustainable base that's more distributed is that the regulatory infrastructure is not in place to support that. And there's been a lot of money in here from, broadband build out and utility infrastructure and so forth. But I don't think the regulatory needs at the state level in the energy commissions, like I know virtual community net metering would help a great deal to help integrate various locations, and former locations of steel mills or central station power plants might be really good for organizing a new manufacturing center. Like if you're using a different feedstock, such as, a hemp-based or a mycelium-based or something else that requires, a supply chain and then redistribution of products. But for the actual power generation, every building that has a south-facing roof can become a power generator. And in places like Germany, where they have a feed-in tariff, everyone has an incentive to be a producer. And they organize those integrations of the load and the production by artificial intelligence software that monitors and manages and shifts around the power to where it's needed. We have that kind of technology and that kind of capability, but deploying it would be really inhibited by the existing regulatory structure. So I would like to see some kind of a working group or a study group around the new electric grid that focuses on the regulatory interface, because it is quite an impediment right now to things that could happen this moment. And I can tell you in more detail what my town is going through as we try to cope with this, as we're adding 3 more net zero buildings in our community at 1.5 square miles. We should be able to put a virtual meter over the whole town and just drop it off the grid. But legally, that would be totally impossible. Even saying it out loud, I'm possibly subject to persecution shortly. But this is something that I think we need another piece of legislation to deal with. And I don't want to let it sit forever because it's becoming a huge obstacle.
Thanks, Patricia. That's helpful. And I'm hearing a couple of pieces there that I think are useful inputs to the conversation. One is the importance of thinking about regulatory decision-making and ways that utility regulation in particular, I think you're referencing, can inhibit sometimes and is related to the decisions around reusing these sites. So that's important analysis, especially as we see new ways that entities are able to generate electricity themselves. And also a theme that I think is tied to some conversations that came up in our accelerator group around kind of the complexity of these situations. Oftentimes we see sort of energy system analysis looking at the electricity system in particular, and there are some difficulties when we start thinking about options outside of the power sector that we could locate on these sites. And so that's a new type of analytical framework that I think a lot of people are starting to approach and grapple with, but it is still somewhat new.
Sam, this is Bhima. I mean, this is a very important point about this distributed energy and regulatory framework. But in addition to that, you also need the grid, right? I mean, the grid modernization is so essential to this in terms of infrastructure for the grid to be able to go back and forth. North Carolina, for instance, is facing that. They have plenty of renewable energy, but they don't know how to put it and send it to the right places because the grid is not there. So I think states, if we can incentivize them to step up to take advantage of this bill funding and the IRA funding and do something with that grid to modernize it, I think we'll be in a much better shape in terms of this distributed energy.
Thanks, Bhima. And that's really identifying another stakeholder that's really important in kind of maybe organizing some of this work. So thinking about states and what state offices are pretty important to engage with as different groups consider this opportunity. I want to keep the conversation going, but I have a couple of prompts as well as a Google Jamboard where I've organized a little bit of information about the handbook project that folks can reference for this conversation. So I'll post that in chat. So this link on the left-hand side of the screen lays out a little bit more information about the project that Amanda summarized. So including the goal, which is enabling local champions to lead or participate in redevelopment efforts. And the target audience, which is local government officials and key stakeholders. The blue stickies on the left kind of outline the three pieces of the work that we're considering. The first is this interactive website, the handbook, that can serve as a one-stop shop for useful resources. The second is building out a network of experts who are able to kind of engage in the different things that need to happen in order to transition a site. And the third is identifying potential community champions who are interested in pushing forward this work with a particular site. And so those are kind of the three areas of work that Reimagine Appalachia is thinking about organizing around. And again, I think this conversation is an invitation both to provide input to help shape that work stream. And that can range from both comments and feedback to offers. If you really want to engage in a more sustained way over time, we'd love to hear that too. But also stories, examples that you have from your work about some of the successes or barriers or things that need to happen in order to kind of further this opportunity. I'll pause after Patricia and Bhima share. Does anyone have reactions to those comments or questions for Amanda?
I had a couple things to throw out there, and I was following along very closely to the conversation, but a vendor just came into my office. I said, I can't talk now. So I missed the last couple of minutes. So Sam, sorry if like everybody's covered this. Okay. So I would just say we do need regulatory reform. I work with Solar Holler, which is based in West Virginia. Solar Holler has done some of the best work on distributed energy, community energy. They're going to get bigger and better, doing a lot of things. But, West Virginia is as bad as it gets in prohibiting and impeding, distributed energy and community energy. I've been chatting with people today on this summit about how it's getting worse, in the West Virginia legislature. And, the one party came into the West Virginia legislature this year, have a massive supermajority. And then, one only has to look at the TV once to know that the Congress, what's going on in Congress, we're not getting legislative reform federally and in many states anytime soon. We have to work, with what we've got to make it happen. And I think that's a reality. Oh, and let me just say one more thing. All this past year, the renewable community, the environmental community, common sense people have been trying to get a renewable energy portfolio standard, a clean energy standard. And that just was not going to happen and did not happen and ain't going to happen in the next couple of years. So that's one thing. But I will say that the guy who heads Solar Holler, Dan Conant, who's really very good, at the beginning of his work, he got funded by the Benedum Foundation, and Benedum gave him a grant to hire lawyers to figure out how to tiptoe around that maze, despite the intent of, every coal-fired, opponent that he had. And he's figured out how to fleece the system the best way it can be done. And I would urge, Dan Conant to be part of the discussion with Reimagine Appalachia on how they've gotten around the real serious roadblocks that he's experienced. He's a West Virginia guy. But, if you can do it in West Virginia, you can do it anywhere. And then I had another comment, but I'll pause on that and see if there's any response on that. Okay. The other thing, I think there's good news and bad news. The good news is that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization, after many, many years of resisting the idea that they were going to put brownfield resources of various kinds into the power plant sector, basically saying that those responsible parties who dirtied up those dead coal plants should be the responsible parties, and we're not going to give any of Uncle Sam's money to deal with these things. There's a different feeling now. There's a different feeling that, we have to bear some responsibility as a federal government to find new solutions to deal with dead coal-fired power plants and repurpose those. And there's going to be more money. And, the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of money and things in it to push that way. So EPA Brownfields has opened up, and they have a ton of money from the bipartisan infrastructure law for what's called land revitalization technical assistance. And this is where they will give you, without applying for a grant, you just got to write a letter to your EPA region. So for Appalachia, that'd be, region 3 or region 4, you have to write them and say, we have a dead power plant in this town, or we have a dead, power plant in this region, and we would like land use planners, community planners, reuse planners, market feasibility people to come in and give us a package of what's feasible to use that dead thing for. And we did it at the Mitchell power plant in West Virginia. I mean, they're really good stuff. And I would encourage people that. I'll put in the link what that's all about. And then I know I'm talking too much, but I'll say one more thing, which is that the bad news is that there's very few organizations that have the capacity to take on a big power plant brownfield. Those aren't, run-of-the-mill brownfields. And there's all kinds of groups that can deal with a corner lot, an abandoned gas station, or even a factory. But you take over a giant power plant, that scares the hell out of people, and it should. And so we need to think about organizations that have the capacity to take on that challenge. States could do it, but many states won't. You know, there's a company called the Frontier Group out of Buffalo that's buying up dead power plants in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. They bought the Weirton Steel plant in Weirton, Ohio, and they're doing all that. And they are eager to buy these dead plants because they know how to deal with them. We've got to find that those, you know, count on two hands people, organizations, they're like, oh, 1,000 megawatt dead power plant doesn't scare me. And I'll clean it up because there's not a lot that can do that. Okay, thanks for
Matt. This is Bhima from Department of Energy. Very, very good information that you provided there. It's so useful to learn from you on this. I have a kind of a question around what you are doing. One is, you know, if you talked about small the Mitchell power plant and, you know, a couple of others, if a community, I mean, I'm happy that many developers are buying some of these plants in terms of wanting to rebuild them. But, you know, with this funding that's available through DOE, you need to actually have the Justice 40 component in there, which is that, you know, you're going to do something with the workforce training, keep the community together and all of that, right? So my question is, since you have the expertise on this, how does a community get funding? What's the kind of funding a community would require, a community or a power plant, you know, in a small town required to say, you know, this is my sustainable future. I want to get out of the coal plant and I want to get into, let's say, solar with wind with energy storage, you know, or nuclear or geothermal. And they want to do that analysis and also talk about, you know, what the workforce requirements would be. How much would they need as a seed money to really get going on this? Because I want to know how many of them have that and how they're going about doing it and what type of technical assistance they would need. And, you know, mostly it's dollars. And I just want to get your input on that. You know, what do you think? I mean, how are these people going about doing this? You know, where's the money coming from and what would it cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll just quickly respond, and I'm trying to put into the chat. I will tell you that I've moved into a new office, and for a week we've not had coffee and we've not had internet. Why am I even at work? So that vendor who came in is from Comcast, you know, hooking up my internet. And so I'm having a very hard time getting on the web and getting these resources, but I'll try to do it. Okay. Number one is the EPA Land Revitalization Technical Assistance will provide teams that can help you with this. I will put it in the chat. I just yanked it up. I've been trying to yank it up for a few minutes. I'll put it in the chat, a place you can go and ask for that money. And I'll try to get out, I don't have a link to, but I'll try to get out to Amanda or somebody or Dana, the Mitchell Power Plant report so you can see an example of what they've done. The other one is, you know, Weirton Steel is going to get $200 million of green revitalization now. It all started with the U.S. Department of Commerce EDA planning grant of $300,000 that enabled Weirton to bring in the technical land use planning and environmental teams to say, what could this dead 1,000-acre steel mill be? And so I would say that EPA, Land Revitalization Technical Assistance, the EDA, what's called planning assistance. And then, you know, there's still a lot of Rescue Act, ARPA, state and local coronavirus recovery funding left. A lot of cities and counties have spent their money from that, but there's still a heck of a lot of money left at the state. And a big dead power plant is a good use for a state to say, here's $300,000 to figure out what you're going to do with that power plant. So I'll try to get that into the links.
So is that's how much you think you would need, a $300,000 to really get it going in terms of saying, where are we going to go? Or, you know, developing a concept around, you know, what they want to do. Would like a 50 to 100,000 be the right amount? You know, I just want to get your, because you have experience in this field and I'm asking you this question.
I'd say I'd say 250 is better than 50. You get $50,000 to get a brownfield technical expert in, and a land use planner, and someone who could do a market feasibility study on potential reuses. That 50 will get eaten, by real quick.
Mhm.
I've done this at a couple places with $250,000, $300,000.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And I would add visioning and asset mapping too.
And this is, I think, pretty helpful conversation in a couple of respects. One of the purposes of the handbook, I think, is to provide the type of information that a community may need in order to understand what they should be asking for, or what they need in order to make that initial assessment. And that's information I think that can be useful for communities as well as for government in thinking about what sort of grants they would be useful to provide. And so those are pretty helpful comments. Perry, I see your hand up, and I'll note before you go, if folks have thoughts related, please do feel free to drop them in chat in addition to speaking verbally. But Perry, over to you.
Thank you. Question for any of the recent speakers. Anyone looking at lobbying FERC to change policies in order to speed up the development of electric transmission lines across state borders, like they have for pipelines, especially as the it's the question of how do we also build up the grid system as more and more solar and wind farms come online. On the side, I'm asking because the Citizens Climate Lobby has identified that as one of its priorities for working on this in 2023.
Thanks, Barry. And I know there are groups along with yours focused on this issue in particular. One relationship that I've heard to the redeveloping coal plant work is really the opportunity to site new generation at some of these facilities to make use of freed up transmission, because building new transmission can be difficult. And so we really see strong opportunities for locating new kind of demand side activities as well that can provide a lot of jobs, but people are also looking at retiring fossil fuel sites as places to put new generation that can make use of that free transmission. Curious if anyone else has a response to Perry before we turn to Lou. Yeah, but it's an important question and an important issue to think about. Lou and then Jeremy.
Yeah, is there any kind of pipeline in the inverse where you have either a company, organization, nonprofit, whatever, individual who says, I got this great project, I just need 20 acres, doesn't really matter what that 20 acres looks like, 40 acres, whatever it is, and helping them find one of these facilities and find the funding to purchase the facility or whatever it is. Is there anything established for that on the back end side?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not aware of that. That gets at some of the conversation that Lou, Noah, and Amanda, you were in the kind of the circular economy conversation for the first breakout, and thinking about some of the matchmaking that could be useful. It also seems related to the conversation that Bima and Matt were having around some of the early sort of grants or other financial inputs that can be useful for supporting visioning around what could be done at some of these sites. And so that I think is a pretty helpful identification of a need. Amanda or others, do you have thoughts for Lou?
No, I had the exact same thought you just said.
Mhm.
So it's a good role for matchmaking.
It's the state development offices that are going to keep those lists of companies looking for, I need 10 acres, I need 50 acres, I need 50 acres that has a river front, and barge facilities or whatever. So, the West Virginia Development Office, the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, they do that. Now, whether their matchmaking is great, but what I find most of all is communities aren't getting their their dating profile up on that matchmaking site. They're like, I had a call with DCED and told them to bring stuff to my town in Lawrence County, but you got to actually put together a prospectus and a pitch deck and information and an asset map of what you got in Lawrence County that you can put into DCD, and then probably talk to DCD and say, this is where we want companies to come. If you need anybody that needs X acres, we're the place. So that's one place I would go.
Well, one thing I know we've thought a lot about already is, and it's been brought up that there are the massive brownfields on these sites that need to be cleaned up and represent. It's part of the reason why we have property owners that would prefer to sit on them. But that, there's really interesting things happening. Like mining brownfields for rare earth minerals that go into battery technology, and using fly ash to turn into eco bricks, and those I'm thinking of as potential like anchor industries that could be on these sites. So like if we even just do creative thinking about what are the barriers and what are the opportunities on that, creative opportunities on the site, because that might also then help us figure out the vision of where we at least start the work.
Thanks, Matt and Amanda. Jeremy, I see your hand up. Jeremy, you are on mute. We want to hear you.
Happens at least once a week. So I just want to connect back to what I was talking about earlier with the DOE loan program, and to say a couple things. Matt, you gave some really great examples about stuff that's happening, the Form Energy plant, the Sparks battery plant in Taylor County, the South Charleston plant. I mean, these are really great examples of like stuff that's happening. And this loan program really can make the value proposition to a developer much, much more attractive. And it changes the finances about how you, the bottom line about how to get these projects going. And so I think what we're talking about here is like the precursor steps that are needed. Like, how do I evaluate my site? How do I understand what the assets are? How do I, understand the environmental liabilities, all those pieces. And so I think there's a real need for this toolkit in particular, but also for connecting with all the existing resources that are out there. I mean, the Just Transition Fund has something on federal programs. Earlier the chat, there was something that Reimagine Appalachia has put together. So really helping communities easily access those resources to kind of get started on what we want to do. And then I think that there are ways that RMI can help. And those include, making those connections, as you've talked about, with the state development offices, connecting to developers, providing some technical assistance that would support some of the financial analysis that's needed, and potentially doing facilitated events that can help bring people together and come up with a solution that works for everybody. And so you're absolutely right. Like having that information, specific information to make the case to a developer is sort of the critical first step. And once again, like, particularly with this loan program and for some of the other incentives that are aimed toward energy communities, you have a leg up. It's a competitive advantage for those communities to attract those investments. And so how do you do that in a way that supports what the community wants? I'm very excited, so I'm happy to talk more.
I would love just to add that, and I feel like, we have a history in economic development, is what I call economic skirt chasing, or always trying to find somebody wherever to bring in money. But I think a better approach is trying to figure out what are our existing assets and build around it. And it's more work, but I think it's worthwhile.
So I believe we have 2 or 3 minutes left. I'll close by making maybe a couple of observations about the conversation. This is an issue that I think is pretty important, but also technically complicated. We've identified some of the analytical needs for thinking about coal plant or power plant redevelopment. We've talked a little bit about some of the capacity building and financial needs in ways that communities might need support in creating visions. We've talked about a number of actors who have a role to play, from regulators to federal government to probably asset owners and communities themselves, as well as identified, I think, a number of places where different groups are already providing important support. And so there is a lot happening in this space. There are, I think, a lot of pretty exciting opportunities from both nonprofit groups, from states, from the federal level to support thinking about coal plant redevelopment. And this is work that I think Amanda is really going to be pushing forward, but along with a growing group and community of practice that we want to be building out. We have a monthly call on this topic that we are kicking off later this month, really. During those calls, we plan to discuss both the development of the handbook, as well as hear from people who are kind of working in this space. There are examples of success stories, of barriers and challenges, find opportunities to engage in different projects. And so maybe just an invitation, if you would like to be invited to participate in that group, either to talk or listen in on a particular session or join on an ongoing basis, feel free to contact Amanda or myself, and we can add you. And I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. With that, I guess, sort of logistic thing out of the way, for the final few minutes, would invite any sort of further comments or thoughts that people have reflecting on the conversation, or ideas for work that you might want to be doing in this space going forward.
I wanted to give a little plug. I have an event coming up February 21st about eco-industrial parks and kind of circular manufacturing. I don't have the link out yet, but if you're interested, I'll put my email in the chat, or interested in chatting about anything else. Happy to have a conversation about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Lou.
Yeah, I think one of the best practices we should have on our online handbook for redeveloping shuttered coal plant is probably some sort of documentation on eco-industrial parks. Like, what does it mean? What does it look like? How do you get there? I would love to have possibly even a whole chapter in the handbook, so to speak, on that subject. So maybe that's something we could work together on with.
Absolutely.
And it looks like we have more time than I thought. I thought we were closing at the 45 minutes.
So, Sam, this is Bhima again. So I think one thing that's going on is, across the country in states like Wyoming and Utah and other places, and even the Four Corners region, there's a lot of activity going on in the states where they are trying to look at what their existing fossil assets are and how they can move them into a sustainable future. And there's a lot of that information that's actually ties up even with workforce training and everything that Matt touched upon, the EPA brownfields and the EDA and grants and things like that. So while this is talking about fossil asset to what we call an industrial park like thing, there are a lot of common elements between a coal plant or fossil asset going to something else, even if it's nuclear energy or something else, in terms of, let's say, the workforce development. And there's some common elements that you can pull out. So talking to some of these states all of us, and participating in each of those, you can tease out something that will be useful to what you want to do here with this industrial park, like Amanda is starting. So, maybe the workforce training and how they went about going to Department of Education and getting the right type of funding to get their workforce trained, those are common to all of them, right? So I think those things can be teased out, and I think it will be worthwhile for lessons learned from each of these states. And I encourage each of you to find out and attend other states' meetings too on what they're doing with these fossil assets.
Maybe that's something we can do at Reimagine Appalachia, is bring some of those folks in as speakers to learn from them and document.
Anyway, that's a really helpful sort of flag for the group, both those opportunities to hear about what states are doing in particular, but also identifying states as groups that are really interested in organizing some of this work.
Yeah, thanks.
I saw a note come in. I think it had us in mind we were ending 10 minutes earlier than we actually are, so we have a bit more time. So if anyone has a comment, but I also have some more prompts. Anyone have reflections or thoughts on what's been shared so far? Yeah, Patricia.
Yeah, I just want to put into this group's thinking a little bit that, we're really in a transformation period, and the kind of manufacturing that we know from the past that depends on extractive industries, especially fossil extractive industries with long supply chains and global markets. That's one of the things that's shifting more to regional and local based activities, things that are growing up out of need for local food production, local materials management, local materials production that are not fossil based. And we're really seeding a new concept of what it means to make things, looking at things that have longevity rather than that are made to be thrown away instantly. And that is a huge shift in the very structure of our economy. So this isn't something that's going to happen lickety split, And I think investing some time in listening to people, as we did at the beginning of this Reimagine Appalachia process, was really valuable in that regard, because, until we started listening to people, the prevailing wisdom is, let's train people to do things that are coming up in the economy, and they can be programmers and, techs in the electronics industry. And we found out people don't want that. They want to go back to making the natural capital of their land live again. And so as we're looking at these old coal-fired plants, maybe we don't need to keep big central station production facilities as part of our landscape. Maybe we need to rethink what it means to make things. And I think about Johnstown, where they have the makers market with a whole bunch of smaller enterprises that are all artisan based, and they're really thriving. And there are a lot of places like that where people are looking at, what is it that we do? What gives us joy? What gives us something that we can give back? And I think the sharing of skills and the sharing of capacity is a really important part of this whole thing. And maybe those big, dirty old plants weren't the asset everybody thought they were, Maybe we really want to have jobs that don't make people sick and ruin the land as the future that we built. So I'm going to stop there.
That's helpful, Patricia. Thank you. And I think it connects to the comment you put in the chat around documenting success stories.
Mm-hmm.
When we're thinking about new opportunities for growing sort of economic diversification, or finding ways to think about new ways for economic growth or economic activities, something that I think we'll be looking out for is how to support visioning and creation of some of the ideas that you're articulating here. And so I think, Amanda, I'll speak for you and then turn to you, but where we can identify organizations or people that want to engage and think about how they might work on a project that could reuse some of these sites, I think that would be pretty interesting and exciting. But Amanda.
Yeah, no, I was gonna just add to the idea that community input and visioning, that it has to be an important piece of this. I have some concerns, like the easier thing is to just turn it from one kind of plant to another kind of plant. And I think if you actually talk to key stakeholders in the community, that's not necessarily what they'd want. And I think if there's a lot of valuable and meaningful community input, that you could end up getting somewhere that's a lot more exciting and interesting over the long haul. And so this I think a really critical piece of the puzzle, that you have to have the right people at the table and you need to do visioning.
Thanks, Amanda. Joanne, I saw you wave your hand as a response, maybe too, noting that you might get cut off in a minute or two. But
Yeah, you're just saying, where are those people that want to do this? And I was just saying, yeah, me, that's what I'm trying to set up. Yeah.
And Joanne's gonna be joining us, I think, in our next, well, hopefully she'll be a continued joiner, but in our next meeting, which is January, what's Sam?
25th.
I can't remember, 25th. And others can join us too to talk about the visioning work that you've done for Reimagine Beaver County.
that'll be January 25th at noon Eastern time. So again, if you're interested in participating either in one session or on a continuing basis, please do email me. Amanda, do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share about sort of how you're thinking about bringing the work forward?
Yeah, so we'll keep meeting, and we want to build out a network of experts and communities doing the work in order to learn from each other, have folks like Joanne who are like in the middle of trying to figure everything out, like who can she go to? Well, we want this sort of network of experts, like if you need somebody to help you with this, go here. And as well as like Bima was talking about, and Matt, like what are the resources we can tap for this? I think also we'll want to be thinking about things that came up a few times about sort of the policy environment and what gets in the way, and how can we work together collectively to tackle those different issues.
Else to kind of linger back in here.
I think we're there. Welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking with us for the last couple hours. We have a little bit of couple things we're going to ask from you all. First, we have a survey for the day. If you already took it once, you can take it more than once. You can, oh, thank you, Molly. We both put it in there at the same time. But you get to enter to win a bandana, or we have stickers as well if you want something that says Reimagine Appalachia on it. But really, we just really want your opinion, and we really value your time. So second, I think we're going to do a couple, while y'all can sit on that, but I think we're going to do a couple of those interactive questions for the group as we're trickling back in. Do you have those ready to go, Annie?
Yes, let me drop the first one in the chat and then I'll share my screen.
Great. So this is a question for what's the main reason you joined us today? We're looking to learn, we have a lot of events at Reimagine Appalachia. That's one of the big things we do as a coalition. And it's so helpful for us to make sure that our content and programming is relevant and useful to you all. So in order to do that, we figured every now and then we should just ask you all to tell us. So you should tell us, why are you here? Why are we doing this? So it's so incredibly helpful for us when you guys do us the honor of sharing your, why you're here with us today. So we'll give that a minute to fill out. Just a quick note about next steps. Tomorrow at 11 a.m. we have our second keynote panel. It's going to be focusing on community benefits and how to grow those with new federal funding. One thing I just said in our labor conversation was that the work to improve the lives of workers, to improve environmental quality, to make sure communities are empowered to make their decisions about their own community, that work has been going on for decades. It's not new, but what is new is this incredible opportunity we have with federal funding in the region. And so we're going to be hearing from folks who've been doing this work for decades on their thoughts on how we can use this new opportunity to expand community benefits in the region and make sure Appalachians who need the money the most are seeing those benefits. So I think we'll move to this next poll question, if you don't mind, Annie. And so you'll see a second poll popping up in the survey, or sorry, in the chat. If you can drop that in there. I've been talking a lot. All right, there's the second one is we'll fill that out again. And then we'll also have a series of breakout sessions after the panel tomorrow. As folks are filling out this survey, I'm looking the wrong one. This one is one next step you're going to do or topic you're going to look into after the summit. So for this one, I encourage you all to answer that in the chat, but I also encourage you all to go off mute. So this is a moment for us, if you want to share really quickly something that you're really excited about that you saw in the workshop, or something that you feel like you can build on. So you can answer this in the poll, please do. Otherwise the screen will look very boring. But we also encourage you after you answered in the poll to come off mute and you can actually tell us with your mouths talking. Ooh, electric transfer. There's the winner. There you go. That's the biggest one. I'm excited. Oh, this is great.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So anybody want to share quick takeaways or things that they were excited about that they saw in their panels? I can be I'll call on people if you but go ahead and just talk and come off mute.
One thing that came up this is Jordy Comis in Pennsylvania. One thing that came up in the faith group was that really set off a lot of sparks in my head was the idea of community benefit agreements. That was as a way for especially faith groups that maybe don't see themselves as viable for government funding. It's like a mechanism to be able to apply for that, or for coalitions that include those groups. But I also started thinking about all of the nonprofits that are nonprofits in name only, that don't really behave like nonprofits, and that's a tool maybe to get them to stop behaving like Fortune 500 companies that have a fig leaf of a nonprofit. I'm probably well known for being too vocal with my opinions, but that was one thing that I really appreciated.
That's great. Thank you, Jordy. Other folks have takeaways, or facilitators have takeaways?
This is Natalia.
Please.
I think one of the big challenges that we're all going to face that will require a lot of cooperation across every type of organization, whether it's grassroots coalitions on the ground or DC federally based organizations. And I don't know how we do it, but I believe we had Imam, again, from our faith group, I don't recall the last name, at our group, talking about how we have to make it plain. We have to make it plain for so many of our organizations. And, you know, we appreciate so much of the federal guidance, and the federal guidance is often hundreds of pages long with many, many links. And whether it's local government or our nonprofits or some of our houses of worship, it's really difficult with low capacity to figure out how to take advantage of these opportunities. So, I mean, I would even ask that if there are organizations who are here with us who have documents to make it plain, and to demystify some of these federal funding sources in a step-by-step fashion, email me. We'd be happy to figure out how to disseminate some of that.
Matt, thanks for raising your hand.
Thanks. Something I took away from the breakout session I facilitated was someone mentioned the development of local advisory committees in terms of bringing more folks to the table. And specifically, they mentioned hearing other voices besides those who are economically viable to volunteer for these organizations. And I thought that was really, I guess, insightful because, you know, working with communities for so many years, you often get repeat volunteers, right? You get the same voices heard at these meetings, or the folks that are financially able to make it to that meeting, dedicate that time, have childcare, have the wraparound services needed to get there. So I don't know how you go from there, but really insightful. They mentioned something along the lines of potentially having a stipend for those to come out and dedicate their time to hear from those underrepresented folks, frankly, because they're supporting themselves, their families, and others in their neighborhood potentially. So thank you for the opportunity to participate today and look forward to the next session.
Yeah, I had a conversation a few weeks ago, right before the break, I guess. But they were saying, you know, if all of these new projects are going to have these so all the new projects through the Department of Energy are going to have some kind of community benefit attached to them, so which is exciting. It's a wonderful proposal. It's a wonderful policy, and then we have ourselves a pat on the back to, you know, to see that policy as part of new Department of Energy funding. But they're saying, like, it's going to be the same, like they're going to be asking going to the same groups, the same people, the same leaders over and over again for all of these conversations, for all these new projects. And, you know, with the amount of money we're looking at, it really could be quite a lot. And so I appreciate you lifting that up, that there is actually going to be this kind of interesting burden of communities. The short timeline, I get it as far as the need to, you know, quickly decarbonize and build out clean energy, but it does not favor the lower resource communities, is what I'll say. So we're going to be seeing some interesting pressures. So it's great to acknowledge that, and I think to be thinking about those in advance. Other folks want to share takeaways or learnings, or kind of, you know, what they might want to, what they're kind of taking with them or might be building on going forward. And oh, I love it. I love it, Jenny. Build those green tech hubs. So I think I'll leave it at that. I really appreciate all y'all's time. Folks seem quiet, and I totally get it. Your brains are full. It's been a busy 3 hours. We'll see folks again tomorrow. If you're not joining us tomorrow, you're invited to we have our twice monthly campaign update meetings, and then we also do have a series of events that is on our website, Reimagine Appalachia. We have
.org/events.
Thank you. Just put it in there. Nobody's going to memorize what I say anyway. Yeah. So if you want to continue joining us, like I said, we'll get a wrap-up email with materials. There's been so many incredible links shared, and so we're going to do our best to try and capture those again in that wrap-up email with notes and all that. So Eric, I'm sitting here reading your comments. So thanks again to all of our incredible facilitators, speakers, behind the scenes, tech queens. That's your, you can put that on your business card, Annie.
Where's Annie? Wave your hand.
And Molly.
Our Zoom wizard. Molly,
and who here got an email from Molly Up to Grove? Has anyone ever got an email?
Everybody here got an email from Molly.
So
wave Molly.
Molly doesn't want you to acknowledge her, but go ahead and do mentally so she doesn't see it.
Bad.
She'll let her feel the good energy. Great. So I think we'll close out. I was just so excited reading Eric's all these beautiful comments coming in the chat. I'm just going to read those, and we'll hopefully see you all tomorrow. And thank you all.